Hi, welcome to Lecture 2, Chapter 2 on conceptualization and measurement. This really should be a review for everyone. We covered this in Research 1, and also I gave a lecture containing this material in Advanced Standing. The first step in measurement is defining what you're going to measure, and there are two types of definitions. There's a conceptual definition and an operational definition. Conceptual definitions are abstract concepts that social scientists discuss in their theories. Things like depression, anxiety, foster parent effectiveness, sexual abuse, and I'm sure you can think of many others. And also you can think of it as usually a dictionary definition. I mean, if you were to look depression up in the dictionary, you would probably find words like sadness, melancholy, and my all-time favorite, the state of being depressed. So, in the book, it gives, page 36 in the text, it gives a definition of child neglect. You can tell by the length of it. It's probably written by academics. I just want to read that to you, and then we'll discuss it. Again, this is a conceptual definition of child neglect. Is a condition in which a caretaker responsible for the child, either deliberately or by extraordinary inattentiveness, permits the child to experience avoidable present suffering and or fails to provide one or more of the ingredients generally deemed necessary, essential for developing a person's physical, intellectual, and emotional capabilities. Well, in thinking about that definition, I wanted to ask you, can you measure child abuse with this definition? And as we think about that, we want to convert that conceptual definition into an operational definition. We want to break it down into concepts that can be measurable. So I want you to take a few minutes, and based on your professional or personal experience, write down 3 or 4 measurable objectives for child neglect. Maybe pretend that you're making a checklist for DCS, and you want to list on there items that would indicate that a child had been neglected. So pause the recording and do that, if you will. Okay, I'm going to assume that you've already done that. In class, I would go around the class and ask what you'd come up with, but since this is a taped lecture and I don't have you as an audience, I'm going to assume that you came up with things as lack of personal hygiene, bruises on a child, inadequate immunization record, poor school attendance. In the book, it suggests how many times has somebody left a young child under 6 home alone while you were out shopping or doing things. Have there been times when a neighbor fed a child of yours because you didn't get around to shopping for food or clothing? Was there a time where you kept a neighbor kept your child overnight, more than once, repeatedly, because nobody was taking care of him or her at home? Another one, has a nurse or social worker or teacher ever said that any child of you wasn't being given enough to eat, or the house wasn't clean enough, or they weren't getting adequate medical care? So those are all things that if we came together, we could make a list, and from that list we could check off and decide, make an operational definition whether a child had been abused. The process of measurement is simply assigning labels, usually numbers, to characteristics of people or other things according to some set of rules. If you'll remember in Research 1 as well as Advanced Standing, I gave you a copy of a survey, and we asked about a number of questions, and usually for those questions the answers were given in numbers, and those were assigned to characteristics of people. And the distinctions, those characteristics of people are usually referred to as variables, and those are then broken down into 4 different categories, even not for quantitative variables. Qualitative variables, we'll talk about at another time. Qualitative variables are open-ended questions. Nominal for quantitative variables, nominal, ordinal, interval, and ratio, and we'll talk about each one of these. And again, this should be a review, so I'm going to go through it rather quickly. And first of all, I just want to give you a list of typical variables, and we'll come back to this list, and I'll be asking you to assign nominal, ordinal, interval, or ratio to each one of these as sort of a test of whether you have an understanding of this material. Nominal provides information about one observation, whether one observation is different from another. It doesn't provide information whether one observation is greater or less than an observation. An example is favorite color. Blue is not greater than purple, that kind of thing. And if you will, pause your tape, come up with some other examples that you can think of. Ordinal. Ordinal provides the same information as nominal, that things are different from each other, and then in addition it provides information about whether one observation is in some way more than another. A good example is the places in an election. In the past election, President Obama beat McCain, and then Nader came in a distant third, but the distance between those places weren't the same. Interval level variables provide the same information as ordinal level variables, and then in addition, those interval between the observations are equal. So again, pause the tape, see if you can come up with some examples for that. The one example is temperature. Temperature, the degree of heat between 20 degrees and 30 degrees is the same as between 70 and 80 degrees. The intervals are equal. And the last one, ratio, provides the same information provided by interval level measures, and it's a little tricky. The trick is deciding between interval and ratio. But the trick is that ratio, they have what's called a true 0 point that is not arbitrary and that has some intrinsic meaning. An example is the perhaps number of marriages somebody has had. You can, the way I always test for ratio is ratio reminds me of a fraction, and you can always say, well, if somebody has been married, it's possible that somebody's been married twice as many times as another person. It's also possible that somebody always count variables, which is number of marriages, are always ratio. So let's go back to our list of variables that we came up with and go through those and test your knowledge, okay? Age, and I'm going to pause so that you can pause before I tell you the answer, okay? Age, and we're going to express that in the number of years. So what level of measure is that? The answer is ratio, because again, somebody can be twice as old as somebody in the number of years. And even though we don't think of somebody being 0 number of years, conceptually it makes sense. Let me compare that to an interval level variable. Let me skip down whoops, I already gave you one of the answers. Temperature. If we look at Fahrenheit temperature, I think I already gave you that one. The 0 represented on Fahrenheit temperature doesn't represent an absence of heat, just whereas conceptually 0 represents an absence of age, if you will. So that's if you can get a hold of that concept, you'll be able to tell the difference between interval and ratio. Okay, let's continue through our list. Marital status is nominal. Race, again, nominal. Black is not greater than white or greater than Hispanic. They're just different from each other. Income, gross yearly income. We're not talking about debt here. So gross yearly income. and that is ratio, because it starts at zero. It's possible to make $0. Somebody can make twice as much money as somebody else, or half as much money. The next example, Beck Depression Inventory Score. This is a little tricky. All standardized scores are considered inventories. All total scores, all standardized scores are considered interval in social sciences, because you don't think of somebody as having even if they have a 0 depression score, you don't think of them as being totally absent of depression. That concept just doesn't fit. So that's, but if we look at a Likert scale from, for example, if you wanted to look at a public domain measure for depression, this is something that is free. If you ever need a good depression inventory, I gave you a link for it. But if you look at those, go there, it's similar to, if you're familiar with Likert scales, they go from, for example, strong, like the item can be, I feel depressed today, and they go from strongly disagree, being 1, 2, disagree, 3, neither agree or disagree, 4, agree, and 5, strongly agree. So what's the level measure of that? That's ordinal, because the distance between agree and strongly agree isn't necessarily equivalent to neither agree and disagree. The next example, number of children. I told you earlier that count variables are what? That's an example of a ratio variable. Okay, temperature. I already said that Fahrenheit was an example of an interval. Similarly, Celsius, 0 Celsius, although it represents freezing, it doesn't represent an absence of temperature, because you can have negative degrees Celsius. However, Kelvin, 0 degrees Kelvin is different, because 0 degrees Kelvin represents when the molecules in a substance or whatever you're measuring stop. So it actually means an absence of heat. So 0 degrees Kelvin is a ratio level measurement. Places in a horse race. That's ordinal. They're in an order, but the intervals aren't necessarily equal. Religion, nominal. Catholic not greater than Protestant, Protestant not greater than Islam. The Weiss IQ score, I think I'm saying that right, but any type of standardized scale is what? As I mentioned earlier, is interval. 2 more to go. Time spent studying research in a typical week, in, let's say, number of minutes. That's an example of a ratio variable. because you could typically spend, it's really a count variable, you're counting the number of minutes. You could spend 0 number of minutes, and one person could spend twice as many minutes as another person. Number of credit hours earned. That's ratio, for the same reason as the previous example. You can earn, when you start out, you have 0, and it's really a count variable. So let's proceed. We're going to proceed to talking about measurement error. Measurement is a human endeavor, and therefore can be fraught with error, including bias or different types of error.